Okay, well, thanks for joining us, everyone. My name is Peter J. I'm the Director of Economic Development at Utah Valley University, and I'm also the Community Leader and Director for Utah Ignite in Utah. Utah Ignite is a local chapter of US Ignite. US Ignite was tasked by the White House to find the future of the internet, and they're looking for what that would be, and they thought it would be high-speed, low latency, meaning no delay applications. And so they've spent the last few years looking for technologies and applications that don't work on existing internet infrastructure and require high-speed internet. And so that's what Utah Ignite does. We've given out grant funds. We've looked around trying to help business competitions and done other things to help find those technologies and applications. A lot of them are smart city applications, big data applications, Internet of Things. We also have worked with broadband providers and others that provide high-speed internet. UTOPIA is the largest open access fiber network in the country, and they provide 10 gigabit internet capacity to probably over 100,000 homes now in over 20 cities in Utah. The numbers are probably higher now. Roger can talk about that. So US Ignite works closely to run the National Smart Cities Conference every year. That'll be held in the fall this year. It was pushed back from the spring. We have Glenn Reichert on the call, the director of US Ignite, waving right there if you see him. He's also a University of Utah professor, but he runs the national program. So we're also building a smart cities lab here at Utah Valley University. Utopia is a sponsor of that lab, giving us a high-speed internet connection so we can build and test smart city sensors and devices and software applications in this lab on the Utopia network. So we're excited to work with them. And Utopia has worked with us in the past, and they've used their platform and said they can use it for testing and deploying smart city technologies. So we'll hear from Roger today, and he can correct anything I've said so far. And I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you, Roger. Thanks.
Thanks, Jay. We appreciate the chance to do this little webinar. It's exciting to talk about smart cities. We build fiber networks, but we do it on behalf of cities, and so smart cities is really a nice tie-in to what we do. I'm hoping everyone is everything working properly with my presentation? Okay, I got a thumbs up. You gotta bear with me a little bit here and put up with my little spiel on Utopia first before we get into smart cities. We're pretty excited about what we're doing. We build fiber networks for cities. We don't do it in a competitive way, and what I mean by that is generally, you can look at municipal fiber and say, well, it's some cities do that and it's a good thing, but it can threaten private companies that provide internet service. And so cities have looked at this and said, well, we don't like competing with government and the cities necessarily don't like to compete with private sector either. We want to help private sector companies be successful, but yet the broadband situation in many cities, almost all cities, without some involvement of that city is usually pretty bad. And it's gotten worse over time as needs have increased, but the private sector hasn't kept up with that. So Utopia has taken an interesting approach with this, and just keep in mind, Utopia is not a private company. We're basically a consortium of cities. And they decided, well, rather than compete with private sector, let's enable private sector. So we build fiber infrastructure, and then we allow private companies to come in and use that. So in that way, we're pro-competitive, and we're pro-private sector. And for every one company that may complain about us and not like what we do, there's a whole host of companies that benefit from this infrastructure, and it opens up markets and cities to them. So where we've done this is we have these founding members. These cities spread throughout. Utah represents quite a variety. We have cities that are big. West Valley City is the second largest city in the state. There's a couple other bigger ones in there like Orem and Layton that are in the top 10. And then we have other smaller cities too, some mediums and some smallers. I think the smallest one on the list would be Woodland Hills. It's about 350 homes, I think. And that's one of the new partner cities. So we have the originals, and we've had some recent cities join on, and several others working with us in various levels of feasibility. So our network core, it basically goes across the I-15 corridor. We do have some connectivity down in St. George, but really the core on this right image is where we have fiber to the home projects. And literally in those cities, there's fiber down every street available to every resident, every business, every location where a city might need a connection. And so you can see where that might be tying into smart cities is when we have this type of connectivity that really enables some cool things that we'll get into. And then just the history of Utopia. We built the network, we've expanded it, we've had a good kind of a bad phase, and a good phase is the green phase. And that's where we've been able to show that you can build municipal fiber open access projects in a sustainable way, and that the people who sign up for those networks pay for it voluntarily, and there's enough revenue from those customers that you can pay for the financing costs of those projects. It makes money, but it also creates an infrastructure for those communities at the same time at no expense to those communities. It's really a cool model. It didn't work so well in the red phase, but demand has changed and take rates have gone up. Cost of this stuff has gone down, and so things are going really well now. And so I talked a little bit about how we build this infrastructure and let private companies use that. This is an example of public infrastructure that's open access. It's roads. So we put in, cities put in a road, and you have a picture here that shows FedEx, UPS, Postal Service. They all use that and they compete with each other, but they all benefit from that public infrastructure. But the cities don't sell trucks, they don't operate trucks in those industries, right? Similarly, airports is another example. And so where an airport would offer service or a facility and infrastructure to these companies, we provide that infrastructure to lots and lots of different companies. This is actually not all of them. There's quite a few of them out there. Okay, let's talk about smart city. This is one of my favorite topics because a lot of people think of us as an internet company, and we're actually not even an internet company. We provide infrastructure, and other companies come in and provide the internet services in those pipes. However, the cities themselves become an anchor on these systems, and there's a lot of really cool things that they can do once you have that connectivity in place. We're going to go through this list in a little bit more detail, but one point I want to make is it's not really a one-size-fits-all. We obviously build fiber to the home and fiber to the business, but there's also applications that benefit from other types of networks, even when we do have a fiber network in place. And so as we look at these cities, there's a lot of different things, different overlays of technology and connectivity that all provide what we need. Now, obviously, that foundation is fiber, and almost every other technology out there connects back to fiber. But even with fiber to every address, there are still values in having. I don't have Wi-Fi on here. Wi-Fi should be on here too, but we're not going to provide fiber to the guest of a park, right? So if you're at a park, obviously there's benefit in having Wi-Fi connectivity in that park. And so you have kind of that really small connectivity where you would need to rely on Wi-Fi solutions. You have fixed wireless, maybe to get to locations that are more remote. LoRaWAN is a great technology for low bandwidth, but long and wide connectivity. So LoRaWAN solutions are cool in the smart city space for connectivity of sensors that don't need much bandwidth. SCADA wireless, you have some frequencies available for your irrigation control systems or other SCADA that are out there. And then obviously the mobile providers can play. It's not very effective to connect a police car to a fiber cable. That doesn't work for very long. So obviously we rely on other types of connectivity depending on the application. So let's get into some of these. Each of these is at least most of these has advanced quite a bit. When we started, I think back to 15 years ago when we started deploying some of these networks, we were putting out standard def cameras, and every once in a while we'd have this really high-end camera that was just coming available where it had 1080p resolution, and that was cool stuff. And now we're seeing, even at the same price points or less, 4K video surveillance cameras. So we have sorry, I don't have a live demonstration of this because we have one of these Q6128 cameras. It's a 4K camera from Axis, but it's actually being installed in our building. And so it's not available right now at the moment, but the ability of that thing to capture a very high definition image, of very good quality with good light characteristics, and an amazing zoom on that thing. It's amazing what you can do. And if you can imagine, that thing can use a lot of bandwidth. So this would be a very high bandwidth application that has advanced significantly over time and is very useful for cities to have in high crime areas, or there's been a lot of focus on security, right? So, just yesterday, for example, Woodland Hills had to issue a boil order for their water, and it was because there was a couple of hooligans, who got into their water tank area, and they don't know what they did, and they're like, well, we don't have that visibility. We didn't have a camera where we needed it. We saw the people, and so they did benefit from some video surveillance, but the more connectivity they benefit from, the better the cameras they can put out there and really protect themselves from those types of threats, whether it was malicious or just a couple of pranksters or teenagers out there causing trouble. So, we want to protect that critical infrastructure out there. So the next thing is advanced metering infrastructure. So most of the cities we deal with have some sort of utilities that they provide. In some cases, well, a really common one would be water. And so we see cities across the state upgrading their water meters. And this is a really kind of an urgent thing in Utah because we are low on water. We consume a lot. Everybody loves their green lawns, but it's a limited resource. And so the better we can manage that resource, the better for our conservation of water. And what we see is with these new meters, we'd love to go make the use case and say, every one of these meters needs a fiber connection. That'd be really good for Utopia. But that's not the case, right? They've kind of become commoditized on wireless platforms. And that's because they don't use much bandwidth. They're pretty insensitive to delay and jitter and things like that. However, we do work with the cities to provide wireless collectors that are connected with fiber throughout the community. And so rather than the typical, what used to happen was people drive that truck around once a month and pull a single reading off the meter, and they bill you on that. Now we have live data coming off of those readers that's continuously being collected by these wireless collectors that are connected to the fiber network. And we don't need those in every 10 homes. They can cover areas of 1,000 homes or more, depending on the density and visibility. So, it's a huge benefit to these cities to be able to tell someone immediately, hey, your water usage is through the roof. You may have a leak, rather than wait 2 or 3 monthly billing cycles for someone to realize their bill is through the roof. I don't know how many of you had that have happened to you, but I've had that happen where the only indicator I had that there was a water leak was, a couple months worth of really high bills. And I said, there's something going on here. It would have been nice to know that a couple of months earlier, not just for my own pocketbook, but also for the conservation of water. And so the ability to put these systems in, water is one that's very common for cities. Many of the cities in Utah have their own electrical utility. And so that's another one that they'll use AMI on and put in permanent wireless collectors for those meters. And that saves power, saves water. Those are scarce resources. So SCADA is kind of the industrial control side of utilities. And so this would be, where you have pumps and lift stations and sewer systems and whatever it may be that has this kind of industrial control. And so cities are in the process of modernizing that. The solutions out there on the market have gotten really, really cool. And so this is kind of a screen capture of now what kind of control and visibility cities can have on their infrastructure. It used to be someone would go drive out there and look at stuff every so often, right? That's how you would check, make sure everything's working right. But now we can modernize those systems so that we have live data live controls, and we can avoid what can be very expensive damage or even dangerous situations with some of these systems. Smart irrigation, obviously back to that water conservation thing, not only are we able to monitor water usage, but we can extend that deeper into people's homes. And so we have a lot of cities that have programs to actually pay consumers for reimbursing some of the cost of these controllers. Like if you put in a consumer device like a ratio, I use a rain machine, but I think they might have gone out of business because I'm not getting any updates, but I can still use my app on my phone to control it. But they're very cool in the sense that if you look at this rain machine one on the bottom right, you can actually see the weather forecast on there. And so, on that Thursday date, it basically says, hey, the forecast for that date is to have some rain. So rather than run the water at 100% of the cycle, it's going to run on that day for 36% of the cycle, so that you effectively get the same amount of water and conserve that. So, these smart irrigation controllers at the consumer level are very important. And then the cities themselves offer different programs to help with those. And those devices are all, network connected and benefit from having connectivity. And then the cities themselves become a customer of those types of systems more on the industrial scale. And so on the left, this is one of the commercial systems that Rainbird offers, the Cirrus platform, where they can actually have very granular control. This is an example showing a golf course. And you imagine the amount of water we use watering our golf courses. So if you can save on watering just one day at a golf course, that's a significant amount of water that can be saved by putting these systems in. And so it doesn't make sense to run fiber to every hole and every controller in a golf course. They have local wireless connectivity on those, but then that backhauls back to city offices where they can manage, golf courses and parks and these facilities throughout the city and be very granular and efficient with their water usage. Traffic control, and obviously this is something of a lot of interest. If we can reduce traffic on our roads, there's a lot of stuff going on in this space, a lot of advancement. I think UDOT is doing, I think it's about a $50 million project, kind of an experimental project with Panasonic to install sensors, and not even just the sensors, but they broadcast out information. So if you have a smart vehicle, this hasn't really been integrated into vehicles, but your car would come up on an intersection and already know before it gets there if there's been slippage by other vehicles, like wheel slippage, or if there's been any other environmental situation, or all this, just a vast amount of information available at an intersection from various sensors that gets sent out. And so as your vehicle approaches, it would receive that information, be able to adjust accordingly, potentially brake earlier, or adjust the traction control settings of your vehicle in advance of encountering that. And so with this one, there's not a lot for cities to do. UDOT's kind of taken a lead role. They're already wiring in. We work with them quite a bit to give them reliable, high bandwidth connectivity to every traffic signal that we can get to, so that they can enable these with next generation technologies. And on this other side of that, we see the auto manufacturers putting in a lot of intelligence in their vehicles to take advantage of that, whether it's just safety features or even when we get as far as the autonomous driving cars. And so a lot of really cool advancement, but there is a dependency on connectivity there, or at least I would say an enhancement. The vehicles manufacturers want you to be able to buy their cars and use them anywhere, right? They say, well, we don't require you to have 5G or these other vehicle-to-vehicle wireless protocols that are out there too. So cars communicate directly to each other without depending on a 5G connection. They want to have as much of that as possible, so that you want to buy their car. But at the same time, when those types of connectivity are available, they want to leverage those. So just to make them more intelligent. This is a cool application, smart city thing that we've done, where we've been able to use the connectivity we've had to enable air quality monitoring. And so air quality is obviously one of the hot topics in Utah. At least it was before all these other problems have come up. 2020 has been a little bit of a one-off. But before all of the craziness of 2020, you'd say, what's the most urgent issue in Utah? Well, it was air quality. And hopefully we get back to that someday, where that's our biggest fear. But anyways, these images show some screen captures of the maps available at purpleair.com. And these are air quality sensors that we put in. I had one on my desk, it's over there, but it's just a little sensor about this big, and it has two sensors on there so that if one of them gets clogged or has other problems, you can, it tells you the reliability because the sensors are in line with each other, or maybe they're not, and then you don't trust it anymore. But these are available live on purpleair.com. A lot of third-party producers of graphs and information pull their data. And so like KSL Weather's app for air quality uses these sensors too. We're kind of proud of the fact that we provide more of those in Utah than anyone else. And so we've installed these throughout the cities where we build fiber networks. And so on the map here, I guess on the bottom right one, you can see there's definitely a lot more density in West Valley City, Midvale, and Murray than there are in cities like Draper, West Jordan, South Jordan, Mill Creek. And that's because of so many of those are the ones that we put in. We don't put them all in. Anybody can go buy these and install them. But it's something we've taken a proactive stance on. We see that we have connectivity that others don't have. And so our ability to put those things out there is pretty easy. But pretty cool. We think it's a pretty cool application, pretty good use of the fiber network. Wi-Fi, we've had Wi-Fi for a long time, right? So nothing's changed there, but it has. And so the technology on these radios, we used to just have one client talking at the same time, but as the radio technology is advanced, we have these MIMO solutions where you have various devices that can all communicate in parallel to each other. The amount of bandwidth that you can push through these Wi-Fi access points has grown exponentially. And that's not even considering the Wi-Fi 6 generation that's now just becoming available, where you now start pushing that up to, the theoretical amount you never see, but, the theoretical amount on Wi-Fi 6 solutions is almost 10 gigabits aggregate. They have different frequencies they use and a lot of different channels and all of that. You'll never see 10 gig on one device, but you can have lots and lots of devices connected in parallel. And if they're all using the full amount available, you could theoretically hit that aggregate. Well, you're not going to feed 9.6 gig with wireless. You're not going to feed it with DSL or copper or anything like that either. So obviously, if we want to take advantage of the latest and greatest Wi-Fi 6 options, we really need fiber to come into those. And I say you can't feed the wireless with the wireless. It's like, well, why not? But keep in mind, Wi-Fi 6 is really that small. You're just covering a small little area. You get really good speeds in a small area, but you can't go very far with Wi-Fi. So that's why you need to bring that fiber in, because it gives you the speed and the distance that you need. We see some really cool things happening with cities and their capabilities. And so, it's no surprise that we see more of this happening now. Coronavirus has been eye-opening for many. It's been a crazy crash course for many in public settings where they were forced to use technology to continue to conduct business. We've been preaching about using these types of technologies for many, many years. And, we obviously don't like the circumstances of it, but it has really shown cities how they can benefit from that in their own business. And so we see a lot of city council meetings and other public meetings being conducted over Zoom now. The example here with Lehigh City is really cool. I can't really show the details here, but in the recording, you can actually go and click on sections of the agenda, and it actually will take you to that section of the video recording. Now you can actually comment on the agenda items in the agenda too, even before the meeting. So you can go in there and say, hey, this is an item I care about, and you click on that, and you can provide your comments and feedback rather than having to go to that meeting physically. You can get your comments recorded in advance. You can participate in the meetings remotely. And then even after the fact, to view those meetings in a very interactive way, not waste your time. I remember how miserable it was in the past to have to say, hey, there was some agenda item I cared about at some meeting a long time ago. And you're reading through minutes, trying to figure out what they said and what it was talked about, trying to find these meetings or go through a recording till you got to the right spot. It's so cumbersome and difficult. And these new technology solutions have really made life good for the resident. I think some cities are reluctant to implement some. It's just like, I don't want too many people watching and complaining about what happens. But generally the opinion is that these are very, very good, increases transparency in government, and gives us a better way to interact with our elected officials. Disaster recovery, this is something that's been available for a long time, but obviously something that cities benefit from if they can put their system and information, store it offsite or in the cloud. Those backups can take a lot of space and require a lot of transfer throughput. Smart lighting, this is a cool one that we see a lot of cities taking different approaches with. Obviously, the big win is just get rid of those old bulbs, put in the LED lighting. There's a huge energy savings. However, you can do even better than that with smart lighting. And what I mean by that is, rather than just have those turn on and off when they think it's best, you can have information being shared between lights. So, I don't know if I know I see them all the time. They drive me nuts when you have a light that turns on and then its own sensor gets triggered because it thinks it's light, and then so it turns off, and then it's dark, and so then it turns back on, and it turns on. It sits there in this stupid never-ending cycle. It's like, that's a completely worthless, annoying street light, right? Because it's a dumb light with a light sensor on it. So where we have these smart connected lights, they can coordinate that. If you have false triggers on, one light, you can resolve that. You can program them. There's a lot of light savings also to be had in the ability to dim these lights. And so that's something that these newer lights can do, where you say, well, rather than turn these things on full blast during twilight hours, maybe we'll put them up at 30% and then ramp that up as the light's actually needed. And you can actually save quite a bit of power by having dimming capabilities. And so, not wasting power when we don't need to waste power is a big deal. And that connectivity gives us some really cool options. I have mentioned on here LoRaWAN options. So there's a few of these solutions that, I should probably point out what type of connectivity is suited to each of these. And so, we see LoRaWAN being a pretty good protocol. I know Bosch is a pretty big smart city device maker, and they've got a lot of LoRaWAN connected solutions. And then there's proprietary versions of LoRaWAN, and obviously other ways to connect these devices. But so I'll throw that out there. These all need connectivity from something. Signage, not going to go into much detail. It's pretty obvious, any facilities that might benefit from some interactive information and signs, and then outdoor signs as well. We see those. These are examples of some city-provided solutions. I mean, Maverick Center's city-owned as well. The Orem one there on the top right is a private one, but it's a really big video billboard. But you can provide emergency information on those as well as just general updates. Smart parking. This is getting increasingly important to our cities. This is where you get these little pucks you can stick in the road. You can get them, I think, as much as a 10-year life on the batteries, but I think most of them are guaranteed for 5 years. So you go stick this thing in the ground and then connect back as another LoRaWAN type solution, or at least that's one of the ways you can get these. We'll connect back wirelessly. And so in that situation, you don't have to be going around with the police officers chalking tires. That was kind of the status quo around here, is they'd go around and chalk tires, and that's very time consuming and onerous to have to do that. And then they come back later and say, hey, does that car still have that chalk, and what time did I chalk it, and do I boot the car at that point? But with these smart parking, you know exactly when that car showed up, and you know exactly when they've exceeded the time allowed. It can all be programmed with what your hours of parking are and all of that stuff. So literally you just, a traffic enforcement officer goes only where they need to go, and they can be very efficient with their time, as opposed to kind of this mass marking and checking of parking spots. So it's another one that's becoming increasingly important. You know, we've got a lot more density coming into Utah. You know, I think we've generally considered ourselves a suburban type city, but if you look at where development's going, you know, we see massive high density housing going into many of our communities. And so with each of those, parking becomes very, very important. Smart facilities. So even, you know, when it comes to pickleball courts, you know, and tennis courts, you know, the common complaint we get from cities is, you know, our residents are demanding more pickleball courts and more tennis courts. And then we go out there and they're empty all day long. And, you know, what happens is everybody gets home from work and then everybody shows up at the same time when those facilities are empty for most of the day. And then, you know, they go, when someone's occupied it, when they want to go, then they start complaining and telling them that they need more facilities. But if we can be smarter with how we use facilities, allow people to schedule them, you can have occupancy sensors that don't necessarily record the video feed from people. People don't like to be video recorded when they're playing pickleball. But you know, there's sensors out there that will detect the presence of people without recording video. And then you can actually tell people, you know, through an app or a website or both, whether those facilities are open or not, and reserve them if you want to go that far. And so from a city perspective, that saves them money, right? They go in there and say, hey, we don't have to build new facilities, or we can identify facilities that are underutilized, potentially convert a tennis court to a pickleball court, you know, just paint it differently, right? I don't know. I'm not expert. I guess the net's narrower, smaller. And you put in more courts, right? But those things cost our communities a lot of money to put in facilities. And so if we can manage those resources more effectively, that's a big deal. And obviously, all that type of intelligence requires some connectivity out of these parks. This is a really cool one that we've been getting a lot of support and attention for recently. And so this is the Edwin Wildfire Detection Project. So this is a partnership that we have with, that we've been working on with BYU to develop a wildfire detection system. We're taking video feeds, and these are not normal video feeds. These are using thermal cameras to identify heat. That's what we'd expect to see in a fire situation. And so we've got these histogram analysis, basically a live histogram running of a video feed, a thermal image video feed, so that we can basically see on a pixel by pixel basis if we have, you know, little hot spots and things out there in an image. And so hopefully the video works here. So this is what it looks like. These are pan tilt cameras. And so, you know, we program them to sweep across an enormous area. And we've got one at Woodland Hills, for example, that goes all the way from Payson, and it hits the benches from the east side of Payson. And it comes around, it looks at Elk Ridge, Woodland Hills, Springville, and it sees all the way into Provo. I mean, technically, you can see parts of Timpanogos, but I'd say the distances so far, it's not so effective at Timpanogos. I'm actually planning to put a different camera in Orem so we can cover the base of Timpanogos. We've got another camera slated for Layton to hit some of the mountains up there, and several other areas we're looking to put these cameras. But, you know, if we can save even just 5 to 10 minutes of advanced notification for our fire departments, you know, that could be saving, you know, property, but lives, more importantly. And so, you know, these fires get started and they go quickly. And, you know, just this last weekend, I think we had one fire and it quickly went to 11 or something, and they spread. And, you know, we definitely have some policy issues that we've got to address out there. You know, I think there was somebody was shooting exploding targets, and they started a fire, and they were out there fighting the fire already. And a second fire got started within like 2 miles of the original fire from someone else shooting exploding targets. And you're just like, what do we have to do to prevent this? But I know we got to take up the enforcement side of things as well, and maybe increase some penalties for doing stupid stuff out there. But having these tools are useful not just from a detection perspective, but also from an enforcement perspective. You know, if somebody's in these areas, you know, and they start up a little campfire, you know, I see that in my neighborhood in Lehigh. I went up on the bench the other day just to enjoy the view, you know, drive my truck up there, and there's this little fire pit somebody had put rocks around and started a fire, and it's an extremely volatile area up there where, you know, fires are banned year round up there, and yet people are up there, you know, having their little campfires and putting people's, you know, there's homes literally hundreds of feet away up there from these fire spots, but it's all wild vegetation out there. So it's a concern, and this is likely to be a really bad fire year. But yeah, getting these cameras out there is really exciting. Obviously, we want live video feeds. We want, you know, a lot of people watching these live video feeds, getting signed up for alerts, and providing this resource to our communities. And so it's a cool area of research as we, you know, fine tune settings and thresholds and the algorithms used to detect fires and identify fires. Part of it is a data collection thing. So as we get more and more footage, we can apply artificial intelligence to the detection of fires, but we don't have a lot of source material to go off of. So part of this year goal is to get as much source material as possible, meaning recording of these areas of interest. And then, you know, we're not going to go start fires for that sort of source material, but we'd probably catch some fires in our territory that we can use to help us with the machine learning side of things. Okay, whoop. So then I got some precautions here, right? So we love all of this stuff. It's smart cities are awesome. However, I think this is an important topic, an important aspect of smart cities is how much is too much. So this, with every one of these applications, we got to think about that. Obviously, people are very concerned about privacy. Let me talk about a few of these things here up on my slide here. So the top left is a proposal that the Libertas Institute's been pushing to basically push back on surveillance, right? They don't like the idea of law enforcement agencies using facial recognition, and they don't like the use of government records, you know, pushing too hard. And you know, the difficulty is if you take too many anonymized data sources and line them up, then you have the issue of de-anonymizing. I don't know, I can't say that word properly, I'm sure, but de-anonymization of information is a real problem where you can, well, an example would be down in Payson City. So with the coronavirus, you know, everybody was demanding, we need to know where these outbreaks are happening. And, you know, they said, well, we only release information at the county level, and people kept pushing and pushing for more information. And as they got more granular with where outbreaks were happening, people said, well, it must have been these businesses. When they talk about an outbreak at a business, you know, we think that now that we know that it was in Payson, then it was probably this business, and that business started getting threatened. You know, people were kind of demanding boycotts. The owners felt like they were directly being threatened by putting people at risk. And then, you know, the city came out and had to say, no, it was a different one. It wasn't them, but we can't tell you who it was, but quit harassing our businesses. But, you know, so you got to be careful with how much information's out there, because you can come to conclusions with who those entities might actually be based on, even though you've followed the law and removed, you know, what would be identifiable information. It's not far from that level to be able to figure out, you know, read between the lines a little bit and figure out what the underlying information is. So on the top right, we have a Stingray, and I wonder if you guys are familiar with, how many of you are familiar with a Stingray? I think the new version is, I forgot what it's called. Oh, the Crossbow, I think, is the newer, better. You know, they keep getting better and better, where you know, law enforcement agencies can go in there and intercept cellular traffic, track people and locations. And so, you know, if you're tracking a known, you know, drug salesman or something like that, and you can say, hey, they're meeting up with this person and tracking locations of cell phones, as soon as they figure out, well, this person actually is this person, well, now suddenly we can start corresponding this anonymous piece of information with this anonymous piece of information, and take the anonymity out of that. And so these come across as very big brother-ish type solutions, and there's been quite a bit of pushback on some of these solutions. You say, well, it's a smart city application that helps our law enforcement, but again, I'm not saying whether I'm for or against that. I'm just saying these are things we got to be aware of. There's definitely limits of going too far. On the bottom right over here, one that got a lot of public attention in Utah was with Banjo. And Banjo is a company that relocated to Utah specifically because we have lax privacy laws here compared to California. And I'm like, well, that's not necessarily a good reason to come to Utah. I think a lot of what they do is good and well-intentioned, but you have to ask the question, is it going too far? And so, where they were taking information from various public agencies, and they were, scraping various social media sources and tapping into public feeds, and say all of the things that they were using were anonymous sources of information, but much of the output was meant to come up with real specific information as to what was going on and provide that, to law enforcement and others. You say, well, that's great if we become more effective at responding to people in danger, identifying problems or abductions or a mass shooting event, whatever. I mean, there's some really, really good benefits out of that. But there's also been a lot of pushback because you have, when you look at the amount of data and the amount of tracking that's out there and available, people get pretty upset about that. And that we're not just, it's not just being allowed to happen, but in many cases is being promoted by governments at different levels. Bottom left is this was a story from John Oliver. He takes on a lot of political topics, and basically going through the details of how far facial recognition can go, and to be a violation of privacy. And the technology is amazing. I went to the Consumer Electronics Show in January, and it was the first time that I'd seen that they had a smart city section where it was dedicated to smart city applications. And it was cool. And it was also a little bit terrifying. These systems, you'd walk by and it would say, okay, you are a male and you are this old. And here's all this wasn't identifying me by name, but at the same time, it established a footprint of me. And then as I could travel throughout the convention floor, wherever they had the cameras available, they didn't have them deployed across the thing, but just as a demonstration, they'd have it in different areas. And they say, oh, here's that person again, and here's that person. And they could basically build a history. They use technology almost like what Amazon has at their little stores, where you go and pick up stuff and walk out and it knows what you did and it bills you for it. It's really cool when it's Amazon. It's not so cool when it's the government. So really cool technology that's out there. And you kind of got to bring in that ethics side of thing and say, where are we comfortable with? And I think it's going to be an area of focus in government law and privacy law, because we want smart city, we want to be more efficient. We want to be safe. We want to be healthy. We want to protect the environment. There's a lot of things we want to do, but we also, need to recognize, freedoms of people and privacy concerns. So anyways, that was kind of a last slide in thoughts to say, we don't go too far in your smart city applications. So anyways, that's what I have to kind of go through with smart city. A lot of cool stuff happening out there. And if there's an opportunity to invite some questions or comments, Peter, this is your thing. And so I don't know how we want to manage.
If you have any questions, you can type them in the chat, or you could unmute yourself and ask them. I guess I'll ask one first while people are thinking of their questions. But your marketing director said the last 2 months have been your best 2 months at Utopia. Maybe you can talk about that briefly during the COVID-19 response.
Yeah, we've been saying this is critical infrastructure and people need high-speed, reliable internet, and it's worked, and people have signed up, and we're setting record months, at the beginning of this year and even late last year as demand continues to climb. However, you bring in a pandemic and force people to work and educate from home. suddenly people realize the bandwidth at home isn't cutting it. And so we saw our sales go from, 400 or 500 a month to shoot up over 1,000 a month. And it's kind of stayed that way. We've had several months of ridiculously high demand for fiber connectivity. And it's not that there's any more people out there than there were. It's just that people are using technology in a different way now, and they're more dependent. We're not talking about Netflix anymore, right? I mean, that was kind of one of the major use cases is lots and lots of video streaming. That's why you need higher speed bandwidth, because you're going to go over your caps. So you want a connection that's reliable, fast, unlimited, etc. Well, now we're talking about supporting teleeducation and teleworking and telemedicine, and that those aren't just things that can be done, but they are day-to-day critical needs that we have from our homes. And as a result, it's been good for those who can provide that sort of connectivity. So anyways, Kim, you're on the marketing and sales side. Do you want to add to that at all? Sure.
No, I mean, we were doing more than 400 a month before the pandemic, but I mean, well, it's somewhere in there. But yeah, we've had some remarkable months in the past few, but what we are seeing is that people view this kind of connectivity not as a luxury anymore, as more as a necessity, which I think has been interesting to see the mindset of everyday average users of the internet and how that has changed.
We have another question. Oh, go ahead.
This is Glenn. I have a question for you, Roger. Why does this model seem to work so well in Utah, and yet we don't see it really copied very much across the country?
That's a good question. It was the open access model is very popular in Europe. There's a lot of countries over there that put in government infrastructure, and even some of the private sector providers of infrastructure are open access, and so they've proven it out. However, many of those networks are heavily subsidized, and so in the America, we don't like to subsidize telecom unless it's the incumbent. I just got to take that shot there. A lot of the RDOF and CAF and all of these programs, favor incumbents, and the thresholds for getting those are specifically designed to favor the status quo. We see all these programs paying for 25 meg, 3 meg up connections, which is a joke. But that's, unfortunately, we don't have real good leadership at the federal level for driving broadband needs and meeting what people want and need. So it's been, I am incredibly frustrated with what's happened at the federal level related to broadband. So we struggle as a country in supporting these, what we feel is critical infrastructure, and people are not getting what they should be able to get. Why does it work in Utah specifically? I think it's just been, leadership of cities. We've had cities who did try to go the private sector route. They're offering incentives and grants and things to private providers, and they essentially refused. We have a very strong self-reliance, right? In Utah, we kind of had an attitude of, well, if someone else isn't going to do this for me, I'm going to I'm going to roll up my sleeves and make it happen. And so we have a high number of cities that did that with electrical, right? I mean, when the electrical systems were being deployed, Utah was behind the game, and many of the cities in Utah created and established their own energy utilities and built it themselves and made it happen. And it was kind of that attitude of self-reliance that we have here. It's a beehive state, right? We work as bees. I don't know. But I think that same mentality is kind of applied to broadband, where these cities decided, rather than be left behind and just continue to suffer, we're going to roll up our sleeves and make this happen, and but do it in a way that helps our private providers. And that's kind of the result.
Great, thank you very much. And thanks very much for a great presentation. And in the chat, Ben has a question.
Yeah, it looks like on the chat here, so it says, how do you get your fiber lines into other cities? I'm in Murray, and I heard that you had to get the city officials to use taxes to build the infrastructure. Is there no way to get your fiber into cities without it being taxpayer subsidized? So in the early years of Utopia, basically it didn't require the use of tax money. I mean, there's never been a Utopia tax. However, there's been, it's been one of the uses of general fund money, for cities when there's been a financial shortfall. So in Murray, for example, they were one of the original cities. They built a network, got customers, but the revenues weren't enough to cover all of the expenses. And really, it was an economy of scale issue. And obviously, the demand for services improved since that time. And so it did fall back on the cities to make payments on the system. But since 2009, we've done over $200 million worth of projects, and all of those are being paid for completely from revenues. So all of that $200 million of project, that's $200 million of infrastructure going into the ground, and it's great. And there is no tax and there is no subsidy. There's some risk because those cities are partnered with us on those projects. So if suddenly there wasn't demand or revenue, that would be a risk to those cities. But we're clearing those hurdles piece of cake. I mean, usually these things break even about 33% take rate type of a thing, and we're clearing that easily in these new projects. And so, yeah, we've got a pretty good track record. Like I said, over $200 million of projects that don't require any subsidy or cost to those cities. Preston Cook here. I could do some cool stuff with fiber to the home. Yep, fiber to the home is fun. We got a comment from Lynn Yoakum. I agree on the federal level that we have very poor leadership. Yep. I mean, 25 meg, 3 meg is the standard. It's like, it's really sad. I mean, when we had the previous FCC chairman, he pushed hard to say, let's have a plan. And there was a federal plan to say, we need to have 100 meg connectivity to the homes throughout America with a plan to get everybody to gigabit. And that's right. And I think we'd agree with that. And, when you put in, many consider him, he's an ex-Verizon, employee. So our current chairman of the FCC, Ajit Pai, there's been some things that have been good, but as far as setting standards and programs for promoting broadband deployment, is focused entirely on unserved areas and underserved areas and trying to bring those up to that 25 meg, 3 meg level. And it's like that is far too short of what we would consider, basic critical need for broadband. Wireless water collectors, are these just for Utopia cities? Who owns that data? You're the city. Are you sending it to cities? Okay, so we don't operate the wireless collectors. We provide connectivity. And usually it's when those cities, they'll put out to RFP for what solution they go with for their next generation of water meters. And in those RFPs, I would say, you better not be putting an RFP that just goes for the cheapest meter. You should be looking for smart meters that send that wireless data out there. And then you include that in your cost to buy the wireless collectors and install those throughout the city. And then we work with those cities to get those collectors connected. And then the software with those solutions is what collects that data and makes that available to the cities. So each individual city owns that data and controls that. So what needs to happen for West Jordan to have fiber? Well, I've got this contract here, and if they just have to approve this, and we need a vote at city council, and then we'll build it out and be done in 2 years. So just get them to vote on this contract. Yeah, this isn't actually the contract, but effectively that's the way it works. Is we basically have a program where Utopia will actually do the financing for it. So the city doesn't take on any debt. We have a project or a structure where we evaluate the project, we put together the financing terms, we issue the debt, we borrow the money, we build it, we get the customers, we pay for the debt, and then we have a contractual obligation where the city partners with a portion of the cost of the project, just the incremental in that city, but they don't have to take on any previous risk or any costs of anything outside of their city or anything like that in their risk category. Where their guarantee comes in. So it's a pretty attractive solution. We've been doing that with some cities, and every one of those has either cleared the mark where they don't have any financial exposure, or they're trending towards it if we're really early in those projects. So political will is what we need, I guess, is the main point. Are we working with any state agencies, state level, statewide projects? UTA, for example, needs some smarts. You know, we have worked with a lot of the state agencies. I'd say UDOT has been phenomenal. I'm not saying that just because Lynn Yoakum's on the call and commented, but by having Lynn, she's had a lot of leadership there with the UDOT to make sure that their projects have broadband in mind. And so they've been putting, you know, conduit and fiber and providing connectivity. They've been innovating with, you know, self-driving cars and sensors and a lot of really cool stuff. And so, you know, they don't work just with us. They work with all the broadband providers, which is, you know, the right place for them to operate, right? They're very neutral and help everyone. I think every provider in the state probably points back to UDOT and says they have been very, very helpful in driving broadband adoption throughout the state. And I think they don't get as much credit as they deserve, because they're good and an important reason why Utah is a leader in broadband connectivity. I'll bet NVIDIA wants everyone to have Utopia for GeForce Now so they can compete with Google Stadia. Yeah, so that's another cool application. So streaming video games where it's kind of that promise of, hey, you don't have to go out there and buy the latest and greatest, you know, $600 PlayStation 5. You know, you can get the horsepower and capabilities and functions of the ultra high-end gaming systems, but use cloud processing to give you that capability on, you know, Google Chrome or an NVIDIA, I can't remember what is it, GeForce Now. So you have streaming games. So it's not just like, here's the video of your feed. It's the whole intelligence of the cloud, you know, delivering a high-end video game experience without having to make a major investment in your gaming consoles or gaming PCs. But what does that require? It's a super ultra low latency requirement, right? If you're playing a game, you can imagine if the processing and rendering of those images and graphics and things are not happening on your local machine, you do not have much tolerance for latency from you to the cloud for you know, that gaming experience. So we love the streaming gaming stuff. It's very dependent on good connectivity. Has the shift to telecommuting by so many revealed bandwidth limitations and infrastructure-wide design? Yeah, it absolutely has. You know, the overall experience on congested networks has gotten way worse. On fiber, and specifically a point-to-point fiber architecture like Utopia, every connection is dedicated. So even though we've seen a lot of people use more bandwidth, you know, we have got so much headroom at every level of our network that there's been no impact to Utopia customers as a result of increased use. However, other networks are struggling because they're not making, you know, they're already congested before this happened. And so you start putting everybody at home telecommuting and doing their schoolwork. I mean, it's just regularly where we're on some Zoom meeting, and if somebody's on a Comcast connection or something like that, they're just like, well, you know, I might have to drop off, or I might have some problems because my kids in the other room have to do their schoolwork, and I might, you know, we can only support one of these at a time. It's like, that's not good. I mean, I know for me, I've got 4 kids at home, and they may be doing all their stuff at the same time, and I need to be able to do my work at the same time that they're doing their school. In the meantime, you know, somebody else might be watching video, or I've got all my Arlo security cameras, you know, uploading video and doing other stuff. And so it has been a big constraint or problem for many of the network operators out there. Fortunately, not so much on fiber. Not at all on active fiber, but even the GPON networks, I think, are struggling a little bit over because they do share connections. What's the widest bandwidth link that you can get to a business customer? It's right today, it's 100 gigabits. And so that's pretty good. You know, we haven't had anybody ask for more than 100 gigabits, but we have a couple of 100 gigabit connections that we sell commercially on our network. I don't know how much they actually use them. That's, you know, it's hard to imagine using 100 gigabits at a single location, but you know, there's no reason for us not to offer that. You know, the fiber capability is unlimited. And so, you know, we have 100 gig links throughout our core. And then we also operate a DWDM system. So if businesses or other entities need say a really big connection to a data center, we can give them their own dedicated 100 gig wavelengths on our DWDM system to those locations. And those DWDM systems essentially give us 40 separate channels of 100 gigabits, all dedicated. And so we only usually use a couple of them. You know, that's a lot of bandwidth. So if someone comes and asks us for that sort of connectivity, it's pretty easy to add another 100 gig channel on there. Oh, let's see here. I skipped a couple here accidentally. Let's see, has this, oh, is Lynn here? Need everyone to have the same upload as download. Yeah, that's an important point. You know, I mentioned that earlier that this used to be a lot about streaming and video, and, you know, some of the issues I mentioned, you know, with the federal government, they say people don't need more than 25 meg download. The Netflix works on that, right? It's like, I really hope we're past that, and that coronavirus has demonstrated that this isn't about downloading video content for Netflix. We need symmetrical connectivity to do these other applications. You know, this Zoom call, for example, is uploading a significant amount of bandwidth, just like it's downloading. And so we put a lot of people in our homes and our businesses that are doing using these technologies. We need symmetrical connectivity.
We're about out of time too. I don't know if you want to answer another question or not, but so thanks for joining us, Roger. We do these every month. We've been doing it for a year now, these smart city networking events. We just moved them online in April because of COVID-19. We do have a YouTube channel at Utah Ignite. We started posting them up there. So we had our state chief technology officer and IT director speak about the state of Utah's COVID-19 response in April, and that's on our Utah Ignite YouTube page. We had a cybersecurity presentation for small businesses, moving everything online and being prepared for cybersecurity threats last month. We'll move forward adding all our past presentations on the site as well. And if you actually watch those videos, you'll actually get a pretty good overview of smart city opportunities relevant to the state of Utah. So thanks for joining us, and hope you'll join us again next month. And we'll end there. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter.